Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this new user webinar for Koyfin. Just hope that you're staying safe and sane during these crazy times. It's actually a gorgeous day in New York here, and I hope it's nice wherever you are as well. A couple of housekeeping items. Number one, this presentation is being recorded, so we're going to send a recording out to everyone who registered. So you'll be able to go back and go through some of the tutorial stuff as well. My advice to you as we're going through this tutorial is that you don't click around and try to emulate what I'm doing on Koyfin. Just kind of pay attention and follow what I'm doing, and then later on you could go and poke around. And we found that's the most effective way to kind of learn during this webinar, so that's my advice to you. At the end of the webinar, if we have time, we'll do a Q&A. You can put your questions into the box, and then you could always email our help desk if you have any questions, help@koyfin.com. Probably the most popular question that we get is, how is Koyfin free? Why is it free? What is the pricing? Koyfin is currently entirely free as we build out the system. In the future, we'll have a free plan, and then we'll have additional premium plans that are going to include more data, more functionality, and we're not sure what the pricing of those is, but it's going to be very affordable for most people, or for almost everyone, and it's going to be significantly below what comparable analytics systems are as well. So with that, let me get started, and I'll share my screen here. All right, so just to go through the agenda, today we're going to talk about Koyfin's navigation and data. That's going to be the first thing, kind of give you an overview. Then we're going to get into cross-asset dashboards. These are dashboards that we've created for you to look at, to understand what's going on in the market, and I'll go through those. The next part is looking at an individual security. So if you're analyzing a stock or an ETF, how to look at its attributes, or how to look at graphing different data series that are associated with that security. Number 4, we'll look at the command bar navigation, kind of advanced navigation for finding what you need and to be a power user of Koyfin. MyDashboards is another very powerful feature. It's probably our most popular feature, and I'll go through that. It's where you create your own watch lists and really customize how you look at those watch lists. And then the last thing we'll cover is Q&A if we have time. So this is Koyfin. As you can see, we're a web-based platform. So you go to our website, you log in, and this is what you get. The first thing to mention is that you should be using Google Chrome when you're on Koyfin. If you're not using Google Chrome, we will have some bugs and some other things that aren't fully supported in other browsers. The reason is that we have very limited resources, and so we have to sort of focus on one browser right now, which is Google Chrome. That's the most popular browser out there. It's also the one that's most friendly to work with all these graphing tools that we're creating. So unfortunately right now, Google Chrome is the only desktop browser that we support. So please make sure you're using that. When you have your browser open, if you're on a laptop, one thing I'll suggest, or if you're on a small screen, you want to make your zoom 80%. And what that'll do is it'll fit all the data into the screen. I'm actually going to have it at 100% for this webinar because I'm on a desktop, and so I have a lot of real estate on my screen. But if you're on a small screen, if you're on a laptop, please make sure to put that zoom at 80%. That'll help you out a lot. The other thing you might want to do is you might want to customize how Koyfin looks by using our dark mode. So this is a very popular setting that a lot of users change. It helps people kind of focus a little more, a little less glare, a little more in line with some of the other Bloomberg and Icon terminals out there. I actually prefer the original Koyfin, the light one, but to the extent that you can't see some of the blues, or you prefer the dark mode, that's right here in your user settings. A couple of other buttons to highlight over here. One is this Contact Us button that goes directly to our help desk. So if you have any issues or any problems, make sure to write a note there. And then this help button over here, That brings you to our wiki pages where we lay out some articles. There's a lot of good stuff in here. So if you look at the data and functionality guide, we have a lot of interesting articles to go through the navigation, through the data, through some of the functionality, and I'll reference some of the articles as we go through this webinar. Kind of going to the bottom left here, we have some social buttons here. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, definitely do that. Put out some great charts and content. If you have any issues with our Twitter account, you can blame me because I'm the one that manages it. You could also follow us on LinkedIn over here. And then the other thing I'll highlight is this blog where we put out interesting trade ideas and talk about different themes. So that's, if you're registered for Koyfin, if you create an account, we will send you that blog automatically, but you can find it here on koyfin.com/research, and you could see the last one we wrote was several years ago, arguing that the bull case is a pretty compelling case right now. So you could go through our articles and see what that looks like in there. The other thing to mention on the navigation before we get into the data is we do have a mobile version. So even though Koyfin doesn't have a app where you, if you go to the App Store, we do have a mobile version that you could use, which is really helpful to follow kind of what's going on in the markets. The way you get that mobile version on your phone is you can go to our help pages. So remember, help is over here. Once you get to our help pages, we have an article here called Koyfin Mobile Web App. As the name explains, this is where we show you how to create Koyfin on your screen. We have an iPhone kind of short video and an Android short video. I'll go through the iPhone one here. You can see it's 30 seconds long, but after you're done with it, let me just show you what it's going to look like. This is kind of my phone. That's my dog. That's my wife. And that's Koyfin. The most important things in the world for me are right here. And then it's going to be on your home screen for your iPhone, so you could track that or access that whenever you want. So diving into the data, into the content, we have a lot of data on Koyfin. That's really what separates, or a big part of what separates us from a lot of other platforms, is we have a ton of data. So we focus on stocks, but we have a lot of cross-asset data, a lot of macro data. Couple ways to understand what we have. If you click on this command bar where you could search for a ticker or search for data series that you're looking for, we have these filters here. So these filters are a good way to understand what data is on Koyfin. So you have all data, equities, ETFs, mutual funds, on and on and on. So if I want to look for an energy ETF, I could type in energy here, and then I could filter by ETFs, and then we'll have all the ETFs here. Or if I wanted to look at the energy mutual funds, I could do that here as well. So this filter gives you a sense of what data is on our platform. The other thing that you can do is we have a data directory, which kind of lays out the data. And if you do that, the way to find that, if you go to data overview, so another article here, and you go to the bottom of this article, we have a data directory here. And this data directory at koyfin.com/directory, you can browse all the different things that we have on here. This is particularly good for economic data. So if you're looking for the, let's call it for retail sales in the US, you could go to United States here. You could hit Control F to find, and then you could sort of search for retail sales. And there's the ticker for retail sales, and I could click that. And then I would know what the ticker is, or I could view it on Koyfin, and that would pull it up on Koyfin. So the command bar and this help article should help you understand which data is out there. So let me close that so I don't have too many things open. So now that you understand some of the data that's on our system, let me get right into the navigation, or how our system works. So Koyfin is a single page application, meaning this is an application on your web. There's not a lot of scrolling. So if you're trying to scroll, that's not going to work because we have nothing to show you on below this. So this is your application window. A couple of things to note. In the middle here is kind of the data, self-explanatory, what's going on. On the left-hand side is your navigation bar. So this is kind of where you're going to navigate through Koyfin. And the navigation on Koyfin is made up of three parts. So part number one are these cross-asset categories. And what these cross-asset categories are, it's different dashboards that we created for you to really see what's going on in the market. So for example, we have some stuff on the markets, on equities, on fixed income, on macro. So these are dashboards that we created for you to browse what's going on in the market. The second part of Koyfin is security analysis. This is where you're analyzing a specific security. You will always have a security loaded in here. You can't analyze a blank security. So this by default has to be loaded with something. You can't just browse an empty security. So you could put an equity in here. You could put an ETF. You could put a mutual fund. Any of those asset classes we talked about before in the command bar, you could put in there as well. Just put this spotlight on. All right, hope that's a little bit better to see with the spotlight. So this is the security analysis section where you're analyzing a specific security. And again, I have Delta here, but I could change that to Apple, or I could change that to XLE, and then I could go through a bunch of different things. So that's the second section. The third section to think about is MyDashboards. And MyDashboards is really powerful. That's where you create your own watch list. You customize the way you look at that watch list. And I'll go through that in a second, but that's the third section is MyDashboards. Let's dive into kind of these cross-asset dashboards and how they work. So this is the homepage for Koyfin. It's also kind of called the Now or Today's Market page. If you click on Koyfin in terms of on top, it'll bring you here as well. So this is kind of your home base for Koyfin. A lot of questions or a lot of people say, hey, I want to customize my homepage. I don't want to look at the stuff that you created for me. And I get that, even though you might not like what our architecture or the way we built this page. In the future, we will allow you to customize this homepage, but right now, what you see is what you get. And this homepage works in a couple of different interesting ways. You have this graph here, so I have a bunch of series here in this graph. I could change this graph to year to date, or 1 month, or 5 days, and I'll be able to kind of see different time frames of this graph. You notice here that I have 4 things selected, and the way that I select what's in the graph are through these buttons to the left of each ticker. So if I wanted to look at the utilities and energy in my graph, I would select those as well. And here I have the energy and utilities come up here as well. So make sure you understand that you could select or deselect these things, what you want to appear in the graph. The other thing to keep in mind is we have a bunch of securities here. So these are indices, these are ETFs, and you see a price here. So NASDAQ is up 67.8%. You might be asking, well, what is that? When is that as of? Is that data live? Is that delayed? Is that as of last week? And our index data is live, but the way that you can check is you could hover over this green dot, and this dot will tell you when the timestamp for the data that we show is. So for example, this dot tells me that this is as of 12/14, and I'm glancing at my clock. It's actually 12/14 in New York. So this data is live, and our index data is generally live, but the way to really check that and to check the timestamp is to hover over this dot. The equity data that we have, and these are all ETFs, so they're equity data. Our equity data is a combination of live data and delayed data. So we get it from 2 different sources, and then we show you the most up-to-date source. So for example, for the most liquid equities, we will show you the live tick. So here, 12/14, technology 12/14. Some of the less liquid ETFs, so for example, Australia here, which is EWA, I would hover over here, and you can see that's as of 12 o'clock. So that's actually a delayed price. But as you look through kind of some of these tickers, you could see that the data is mostly live, and the way to check is through this green dot, and that's a very useful thing to do. The other thing that I would mention is these jump arrows, and what these jump arrows will do is they'll take you to another section of Koyfin where you can analyze that data more broadly. So for example, if I click on this jump arrow for US sectors, I know that this is actually going to take me to the sector analysis, but let me just show you how to do that. And so I hit that jump arrow. There's a lot more sector stuff here. You can see this now turns blue because that's where we jumped. And let me go back to today's markets. I'm back to today's markets. And remember, that jump arrow jumps you to a more detailed analysis. If I hit this jump arrow on this graph, what it's going to do, it's actually going to create a graph in this graphical analysis so that I can analyze, or I can then modify this graph in more detail. So let me do that. I'm going to hit this jump arrow. Notice it took me to this graph performance. It loaded Dow Jones in here. And in here, I could add Amazon. I could add Tesla. and I could do a lot more stuff with the graph and have a lot more functionality than I did in my homepage. But just remember, these jump arrows throughout the system will take you to a different function where you can go more in depth for that function or for that analysis. So that covers our homepage. Let me just cover a couple more assets or a couple more macro dashboards that are interesting. So top news, we aggregate the top news on the internet. We also scrub it for spam, but this is kind of your trending news or the most clicked on news, and this is your latest news. So a couple of things here. We have a Twitter feed here that we curated for you. So we decided who goes into this Twitter feed, and in the future you'll have the ability to select your own kind of authors and curate it yourself, but right now we decide that for you. On world equity indices, another dashboard where you can look at the performance of indices. So notice that this dashboard looks a little bit different than our homepage. One thing you could do is you could move this divider left and right. So if you wanted more room or less room, you could do that as well over here. I have my graph here, and remember, I can select whatever I want to the graph over here. So let me change that to kind of the 1 year time frame, and I could look at the 1 year time frame here. I could also select the columns that are represented here. For example, here is price, 1 day percent, and the z-score. If I click this button here, I could actually select some other things. So for example, if I wanted the 5-day change, I would select that. I would move it to after z-score, and I would click out of here, and there's the 5-day change. And so these are different columns that you could represent. You could also sort by these columns. So if I click on here, all of a sudden it'll sort by year to date, and then you'll have a good sense of what's performing the best and the worst year to date. You could sort that by 5 date. So you could do a lot of different sorting things here to see what's really driving the performance of world equity indices. One thing I'll point out, world equity indices, if you hover over this bar, these are the local indices. So it's the local currency. And most of our index data outside the U.S. is end of day. So a lot of this data will be end of day and not live. So just keep that in mind. On the country side, we do something similar to world equity indices, except here we use the ETFs. So here you have the ticker for all these ETFs. And because these are ETFs, a lot of these, well, all of these will be either delayed or live. So South Korea, I could see this as live because it's green. As we said before, Australia is delayed, New Zealand's delayed, but similar kind of setup where you can browse and sort by different metrics like year to date or whatever metric you want, and then populate this graph as well. Just remember, these country ETFs are in US dollars, so they're US traded ETFs, so they're in US dollar terms. So there is a currency translation issue. Factor ETFs, same sort of setup, but we give you the sectors ETFs. We give you the same thing, but for sectors and subsectors, and you can sort these any way you want. The z-score measure I'll highlight right now is really interesting. So what it does is it takes the percent change and divides it by the vol. So that makes it much more comparable when you're thinking about percentage change for the day. So for example, the gold miners here are up 1.2 standard deviations. And if I look at like utilities, they're down 0.38%. But because utilities and gold miners have different volatilities, the z-score lets you standardize the move and compare it versus one versus the other. Whereas if you just can't compare the percent change, a lot of times they won't be directly comparable because the assets have different volatility. So what the z-score does is it normalizes it by the vol, so you can sort of kind of compare this across different sectors that have different volatility. Another popular dashboard that we have is the factor dashboard. So in here, we kind of lay out the most popular factors. The one thing on this dashboard to keep in mind is these factors, if you hover over here, these factors are relative to the SPY. So they're relative to the market. So that's, don't get confused. These are not the absolute performance of the factor, they're relative. You could see that in here. You could also see that when we have the tickers here on the graph. So this is growth divided by SPY. This is small cap divided by SPY. So make sure you understand and you remember that these are relative to the market. But this is a really interesting and cool dashboard to monitor. every day, so that you can see kind of momentum is up on the day, small cap is down on the day. And this will give you a good sense if you're looking at a portfolio or looking at stocks, which factors are performing, outperforming and underperforming, so you can compare that to your portfolio performance and really see what's lagging and leading either on the day or year to date. And this will give you a good orientation, a good sense of what's going on there. The next dashboard I wanted to go over is the movers dashboard, a really unique dashboard to Koyfin. So what this does is it's a little bit different than the other dashboards we looked at. So you select what you're looking at over here. So for example, I'm looking at the S&P 100. So these are the S&P 100 stocks. I could look at the S&P 500. I could also look at an ETF, right? So if I wanted to look at the XRT, which is the retail ETF, I would look at the XRT here and it would populate all the constituents. Or I could look at a dashboard that I have created. So we haven't covered how to create dashboards yet, but for example, I have my SAS dashboard and these are the SAS stocks. So you could populate either a pre-made index we have or an ETF or dashboard, and this is what comes up. And the value of this dashboard is that we show you the one-day return, so you could compare kind of what's moving the most on the day, both positive and negative. And then we also compare the relative volume. And the relative volume is really important because it'll tell you kind of what's moving on the biggest volume. And we calculate relative volume relative to the point in the day that you're looking at. So right now it's about 12:30 in the afternoon in New York. So we'll compare today's volume up until 12:30 to the volume over the past 10 days up until 12:30. So this gives you a good sense on what's trading on the biggest volume. If I just look at the S&P 500 here, just to kind of see what's going on, you can see here that Tyson Foods, I'm not sure what's going on there, but it's down almost 10% on really large volumes. That would be kind of important if I were an investor in the stock to kind of say what's going on there. And you can see some of the airlines are also trading down on big volume after Mr. Buffett this weekend said that he sold all his airlines. So this will give you a good sense on what's moving on the most volume. The last kind of dashboard I'll cover here is market scatter. Again, you can select whatever index or whatever portfolio or ETF you want, and then you can compare the entire portfolio based on two variables. So right here I have EV to sales versus market cap. I could also do market cap versus, for example, performance over the past, let's say, year to date. And so then it would populate my scatter plot with market cap and performance year to date. So this is a great way to kind of see different outliers for different variables. And I have my table here with the holdings, and then I can download my holdings as well to a CSV file. So this lets you download all this data to a CSV file where you can manipulate it and play around with stuff like that. So really another kind of like powerful dashboard that we have or function, market scatter. I am not going to go through the rest of these dashboards for sake of time, just to be mindful of the hour that we have. Make sure you sort of go through these, but in fixed income, we have global yields, yield curves, corporate credit, fixed income factors, and then macro, we have currencies, commodities, world economics, and an economic calendar. So those are all really interesting cross-asset dashboards that you can look at later and just sort of click around. And I'm sure you'll be able to figure out after understanding how our system works on a high level. All right, so that kind of concludes the cross-asset dashboards where you navigate, where you browse what's going on in the market. Let me get into the section called security analysis, and let me just populate this with Apple because it'll give us just a lot more stuff to look at. So the functionality here in security analysis will depend on what you have, what you're analyzing. So for example, I had the Dow Jones Industrial Average in here before. I didn't have these choices. I only had these graph choices. Now that I have Apple in here, I have some of these other choices. So this menu, this functionality is going to be dependent on what you have selected, what you're analyzing. So here, I'm analyzing Apple. The first thing that we have is called your security snapshot. So this is kind of like my security snapshot. One thing I want to mention is that you have this quote box on top of the security snapshot. This quote box is going to remain consistent no matter where you are. So if I go to financial analysis, you can have this quote box. If I go to estimates, you can have this quote box. So that quote box is kind of a way to have your high level data for security, and we have it here. And you could also adjust whatever's in this quote box. So for example, if I wanted my PE LTM to be in there, I would just put it in here. I would move it up here. And now my PE LTM is here. I could also kind of move it around like this. So I can move these little boxes around and customize this however I want. So make sure you customize this quote box, and then it'll just appear and remember for any of your security analysis. Diving into the security snapshot. So you have your graph on the top left. You could change your graph to whatever you want, 1 year or 3 years. You have some news for the security over here. We have a summary box here for the summary of the security. If you think that this text is too small, you're absolutely right. We are redoing the security snapshot to kind of blow this out and make this its own little module. But the description and the summaries here, but we'll be making that bigger going forward. You have some high level information here in terms of market cap, beta, short interest, the sector, and some competitors. You have some information on performance, so performance of Apple versus the SPX. You have some valuation and capital structure information here. So valuation of Apple, capital structure of Apple, and you also have some earnings estimates in terms of consensus earnings estimates for Apple as well. So this is kind of like your high level snapshot for Apple. Just want to point out a couple of things here. One, notice you have these jump links. So these jump links will take you to a more detailed section for example, here for valuation, we would take you to the financial analysis section for valuation in terms of more in depth. For the capital structure section, similar thing. And for earnings estimates, similar thing. The other interesting thing to point out is notice that some of these numbers are underlined. And whenever these numbers are underlined, that means you could click on this and we will show you the historical graph of that measure. So for example, the forward P of Apple is 22.2 times. I could click on this. This would take me to my historical graph. It would load PE in here, and I'll go over how this works in a second. But basically, it would automatically load Apple's PE over time, and then I could change that to 20 years or whatever I want. But just remember, whenever something is underlined, that means I could click on it, and we'll take you to kind of the historical time series for that underlined information. The next thing to cover is the financial analysis. So this is your income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow for Apple. Pretty self-explanatory. You could change the report dates, whether they go from left to right or right to left, depending on what you're used to. You could change kind of trailing 12-month, quarterly, and annual. You could kind of go down here and see all these different numbers. I would point out that this graph is kind of interesting that you can, this graph, you can hover over this graph to get a quick sense of how the information is trending over time. So I could see EBITDA has been sort of flat for Apple, but revenue has been increasing, and that's an interesting observation all on its own. Or I could see the shares outstanding. Apple has been a very aggressive buyback, has had a very aggressive buyback policy, so these shares outstanding are declining. But all these numbers would give you kind of the graphical trend of these numbers, and you could look through the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. We have some financial highlights here in terms of different things for Apple: enterprise value, valuation multiples, profitability, liquidity, long-term solvency. So you have this information here. All this data comes from Capital IQ, very professional grade source for fundamental data. So please use that, and very valuable kind of financial information here to the extent you're looking at single stock. The next section I want to highlight is called estimates. So this is giving you an overview of what estimates look like for Apple. On the top left module here, we have the analyst rating and price target. So this is kind of Wall Street estimate, Wall Street consensus, or Wall Street target ratings for the stock. So you have 20 strong buys, 3 strong sells, and we sort of give you this distribution and give you the consensus price target for Apple. So this is kind of an interesting chart. The rest of this module has to do with looking at EPS, revenue, or EBITDA. So you can see here I have EPS selected here, and what we show you is the estimate matrix for EPS. So basically for 2020, 2021, 2022, what does the EPS look like broken down by quarter? We then take these numbers and then we show them to you over here. So you could see the 2020 number is 1230. You could see it's 1230 here. But we provide some additional information here in terms of telling you how has this number changed over time? So for example, 2020, the estimates for 2020 over the past month are down 3%. So that means Wall Street consensus estimates have declined by 3% for fiscal year 2020. And for 2021, which is now 1471, they've declined about 2.2% over the past month. So this is a revisions calculation in terms of how analysts are changing their estimate over time. And you could see here, we do that by quarter as well. The graphs over here are a visual representation of what's going on with these revisions. So for example, remember when we looked at 2020, it's 1230. You could see how that estimate has changed over time. So it started 2020 at about 14 bucks. It's now at 1230. So these are really important estimates to track in terms of how are analysts, how's consensus changing their view for the future. You could also do this by revenue and by EBITDA. So these are all consensus revenue, EBITDA, and EPS numbers. So this is a really unique and differentiated dashboard. So please make sure you understand how that works. The next dashboard to cover is the news dashboard. So again, we have some high-level news for you from around the web over here. We have some tweets for the stock here, and we filter out some spammy tweets as well. So these are kind of just the high-level tweets. If you want to see the actual tweet, you could click on this, our little Twitter bird, and so that would actually pull up the actual tweet over here. But that's a way to get there. And then the last thing down here is you have your SEC filings. So this is kind of important to the extent that you want to see the filings directly from the SEC. We allow you to kind of then filter by different categories. So here I could filter by financials and then look at the 10Q. And if I click on here, that would take me to the 10Q on the SEC website. So that's the news dashboard. Let me get to the graphing for Apple. So kind of the top part here is your high-level fundamental and your different snapshots for the fundamentals. In here is where our graphing functionality, and our graphing functionality is probably one of our most differentiated parts of our system. So please make sure you understand how this works and play around with it, because this is a really powerful tool that we provide to be able to see trends over time. So I'm just going to start here with an unsaved template, and I'll explain how these templates work. Hold on one second. I'm just going to reset this because I had the price. Okay. So I'm just going to close this. I'm in an unsaved template here, and I'll explain what unsaved template means, but basically just bear with me. You're in a graph, and the way this graph works is in here is where I can control the graph. So right now I have my Apple and I have my historical price chart. And you can see here I have Apple, I have my historical price chart. I could zoom in with my mouse, so I could zoom in, zoom out, I could drag it, I could look at 1 year, 3 year, etc. So very kind of interactive way to play with the chart. Now, the power here becomes that you can graph, we have about 350 indicators for each stock, and you can graph any of those indicators here. So for example, if I wanted to look at the moving average, I would kind of add another data series, and I could then browse what we have here. So I know that our moving average is here under indicators. If you didn't know that our moving average is here under indicators, you can just start here under favorites, and you can just type in moving average. So if I type in moving average, it'll search all these indicators, and it will show you that the moving average is here. And then once you have the search match displayed over here, what you can do is you can hit one of these buttons, and what these buttons represent are different choices. So for example, if I wanted the 200-day moving average, I would select that. If you want something slightly different, I'll show you how to change that in a second. Let me just do 200-day moving average. Let me add some other kind of fields in here. So what I want to add is under performance, let's say I want to add the relative strength, because I want to compare the relative strength of Apple. Under indicators, let me add a beta function. So I'm going to look at the beta of Apple. And then under valuation, I'm going to look at the PE. So let me find PE here. There it is. and I'm going to look at next 12 months P, not last 12 months. So I'm just going to select PE here. And I'm also going to select the analyst price target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, and then I found analyst price target, and I'm going to select that. So these are all the series I selected. You could see all the series here are listed over here under Apple. So these are all the Apple series that you selected. Now, each one of these series has its own settings, right? So if I wanted my 200-day moving average to be my 180 moving average, I would select that series here. I would type in 180, and I would select enter. Or I would click out of that. And now my moving average is 180. If I wanted my 180 moving average to be a gray line because I don't want it to be so conspicuous, and I wanted to kind of make that a dotted line, and I wanted to actually make that pretty thin, I would do that through the settings here. And you can see that my line now is a little bit thinner, so it's a little bit easier to see. So just remember, if I, one more thing here I'll change, I'll do Apple versus QQQ because, excuse me, because SPY is probably not the most appropriate comp. So now I'm comparing Apple versus NASDAQ here, and that's another setting that I drew here. The other thing that you may want to do is you could see that I have these graphs. They're all on separate panes. And sometimes it makes sense to combine graphs on the same pane. So for example, analyst price target, I actually want that to be over here on my price. I don't want that to be separate from the other graph. So what I can do is I can move this up. So I'm going to move this graph up, and I'm going to move it into the second position. So now my price target in the second position. And the way that I then combine these two graphs is I use this legend here. And this legend allows you to merge series. So this would merge it above, this would merge it below, and this would remove the series. Now I'm going to merge it above, and voila, these two series are now merged. That's a little bit obnoxious, this green line. So let me again change that to a little bit thinner, and maybe a little bit, let's do it kind of like this. Okay. I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to take out the moving average because it's going to be a little bit easier for us to see. So this is my now price with my price target, and you could see that these two lines are on the same thing. So remember, you can move these graphs around. You could combine them whichever way we want, but these are the buttons to move them, and these are the buttons to merge the series above or below. So a lot of powerful functionality there. The other thing you might want to do is we have a lot of graph settings, so to kind of adjust the settings for the graph. A quick shortcut for the axes, because that's one of the settings that's changed a lot, is you can just right click on the axis here. So for example, if I wanted to look at log versus linear, I could change that here. This group axis function is pretty important when you're looking at multiple fields. So if I turn this on and the fields have the same units, it'll combine them. And if I turn that off, then it'll create two separate axes. So just remember these group axis settings on and off is a way to combine the axis if it's possible, or to show the series on two different axes. So you can sort of control that. Some of the other settings that we have for the graph are down here in the settings button. So you could change the font of the axis. So if I wanted the font to be bigger or smaller, I could do that as well. I could have a grid, I could have no grid and stuff like that. So just make sure that you go through these settings and you understand the different settings here and how they control the graph. And let me hide that as well over here. So now that I have my graph, and it took me a little while to create this graph, what you don't want to do is you don't want to recreate this graph every single time you log into Koyfin, because let's say this is a graph that these are the indicators that I'm most interested in, and I want to then I then want to use these indicators. I want to use this template going forward, and that's why we have this template functionality. And so what you would do here is I have an unsaved template. I created it over here. I would then save this template as, and I'm going to call this my webinar May, because we are in May. And now this became one of my templates that I have for some of the other stuff. So when you start out, we give you 6 or 7 templates. and then you can edit the templates, you could duplicate them, you could modify them, you could do whatever you want with them. But this is your place to save your templates. Now, when I have a template saved, so for example, Webinar May, what happens is if I go back to the home page and I log into Koyfin tomorrow, and let's say I want to look at Facebook, and I go to Facebook. I'm just going to look at the price. So this is just the price of Facebook, but then I have my template here for Webinar May, and I could look at Facebook using that template that I created. So this saves you time, and this lets you create whatever template you want. And so for me, I have a bunch of technical templates set up. I have some fundamental templates set up. I have a short interest template. I have a fund flows template for ETFs. So make sure you kind of go through all these indicators and set up your templates however you want and save them, and then you'll be able to use them in the future. A couple of things to note for these templates. So if you have a template open, so I have my Webinar May template open, and let's say you add another series. So let's say now I want EBITDA as another series. If I don't save this, if I don't click save, this is not going to save for my template. So you have to explicitly save whatever you do on your template to be saved in here. So I didn't save this. I go back to Koyfin, to the home page. I go back to my graph, Webinar May. Notice EBITDA is not there. If I add EBITDA again, and then I hit save, I go to my Koyfin homepage, I go to my graph, and EBITDA is there. So make sure that you understand that whatever you change, you have to save if you want it to save for the future, or you could save as, meaning that you could save it as a new template, not to overwrite the old template. The one exception to that rule, to that save rule, is annotations. So you have these annotations down here, and so if you have an annotation and you draw a circle over here, these annotations automatically remember even if you don't hit save. And that's because people like to annotate stuff and they don't want to hit save. So these annotations always remember, and the way they remember it is with a template and ticker combination. So for Facebook Webinar May, this circle is always going to be there when I pull up Facebook. If I pull up Apple, that circle is not going to remember. So remember, these annotations, you could go through these annotations. We have a bunch of different things. They save for the ticker and template combination. The other thing to highlight on this graph is a really powerful feature here called save and share. So to the extent I have my graph, what I want to do is I actually want to share this with people, or I want to put it in a report, or I want to put it in a blog. And the way you do that is with that save and share button. So notice I have my graph here. You could do a bunch of different things. One is you can download this graph. So if I download it, I could kind of hit this button and it would download as a PNG to my computer. A quick action that I always do is I right click and I do copy image. And if I do right click copy image, I could then go to a new, I could then go wherever I want, and then I could just, let me just paste this in. And I would paste this in. So this puts it into my memory, into my computer memory. So right-clicking copy image is a good way to save something. You can also post stuff on Twitter. So if you had your Twitter account hooked up, and this is a chart that you want to tweet out, you could just hook up your Twitter. So my Koyfin charts is hooked up here, and I would say this is a great chart. Buy it. Oops, I should spell chart correctly. And then obviously I would fix the spelling here. You could hit post to Twitter, and that would post to Twitter automatically. So that's a really cool fast function. Or you could create a snippet and then put this in a blog, and that will create a little iframe, and you can paste this in the blog. So different ways to share stuff. One thing I want to mention is not only can you share this graph, what we do is we give you advanced functionality to then edit this graph even further. So for example, if I wanted to put a title here, I could put title, and I could change that to 25. And so that would put a title here with 25. I could change the size of this image. I could do kind of different things in terms of displaying the legend, not displaying the legend. One really popular thing, if you're a financial advisor or you have a blog, you can upload an image to this image. So for example, here, I'm just gonna go to my downloads, and I'm just gonna find a random image. I believe I use this in the blog. So obviously you would use your company icon or whatever, but I use this Boulbert image, and all of a sudden that would paste this image here. This is a good place to put your company logo. And now if I download graph, or if I right click and copy image here, and I go and I paste this, somewhere, all of a sudden this icon then remains on the graph. So really cool way to then brand your charts with whatever you want on the top left over here. All right, so that's the kind of the graphing stuff. There's a lot of stuff here. The one final thing I would say is these data series are dependent, or they'll link to the security you're looking at. So for example, if I'm looking at SPY, which is an ETF, and I'm just going to look at my price. Notice here, I can't get some of these series because we don't have analyst price targets for SPY, but we have some other things. Let me just go to my unsaved webinar. If I go to add data series here, you have some other things that are ETF specific. So for example, I could look at NAV, and I could look at short interest, or I could look at fund flows. So I could look at daily fund flows. And then I would probably want to combine these two. But this is a really, there's a lot of functionality here for ETFs, so make sure you understand and you remember that. So this is security specific. A couple of other things on this kind of a graphing modules. Historical table is basically taking whatever's in the historical graph and then putting it as a table, so you can see the table here. If you want to look at the individual data points, you could scroll through here. You could also download the data into CSV, right? So you could download this data, it would create a CSV, and then download all the data you have into CSV. One thing to keep in mind is we have certain restrictions from some of our data providers, particularly on the fundamental data. So if you're looking to just download fundamental data, we have restrictions. I think you could only do the past 2 years on this download, but for most other indicators, you could do the full history if you need. The intraday graph is kind of self-explanatory. It's giving you the intraday price of a security. So here I have SPY selected. I could look at it over the past 10 days. And then we give you the 1 minute line of this SPY candle. And then you can look at like IWM versus SPY and see what's going on there. You could convert these to percent. So let's look at these as percent instead of absolute. And let me turn on the grouping. And all of a sudden now I have my GIP or intraday graph for whatever securities I want. So this is a special graph function for intraday prices. And then the last special graphing function we have is for performance. And performance is obviously very important to a lot of people. So what we did is we created its own little graph function of performance. So in here I could add Amazon and Tesla and Fidelity Magellan Fund, and I could add CL1 for oil. And so now I have these securities in here. They all start at 0. They're all normalized to percent. And then I could look at these. I could zoom in, zoom out. I could look at it over the past 1 year or year to date or 3 years. Just one thing to note here is that for equities and ETFs, what we show here is the total return, not the price return. So just remember that. So if I'm looking at my SPY return over here, this is the total return, not the price return. And so for SPX, we don't have a total return value right now. So SPX, which is an index, will be the price return. But for ETFs and equities, it'll be the total return. And you could see the difference here. SPY is up a little more than SPX, obviously, because it pays some dividends. We do have a help article to talk about adjusted versus unadjusted, where we discuss how to think about total return versus price return. So please have a look in here and how we think about that and how to do that. But that's an important thing to note. Okay, I'm just gonna grab a sip of water before we move on to my dashboards. Okay, so just kidding. Before we move to my dashboards, I forgot to go over the command bar. So now that you've sort of understand what the navigation is like for a system, one of the things you might be thinking to yourself is like, holy crap, you have a lot of stuff in here, and you're absolutely right. So this command bar is a quick way to get around our system. It's analogous to a command bar that you would see on Bloomberg or Reuters. But you notice here that a lot of these dashboards and these commands, we have a shortcut key here. So S, HDSG, and that's applicable to the command bar here. So if I wanted to look at the snapshot of Apple, I could just do Apple, enter, and then hit S, and that would give me the snapshot of Apple. So again, if I wanted to look at the snapshot of Facebook, I could hit Facebook. I could select Facebook here, or I could just hit enter. If I hit enter, it's just going to select the first thing that's selected here. So I'm just going to hit enter and then type in S. And when I type in S, you could see that it matches to this S, and I could just hit enter again. So that's a quick way for me to find Facebook snapshot. If I wanted to look at the Apple GIP price, which is the intraday price, I could do that, and it would take me to Apple GIP. If I wanted to look at my webinar template, I could do IBM and then do my webinar template. And so here I have my webinar May, and that would take me to my webinar May. Now, notice I didn't need to know the shortcut in that case. And so for the command bar, if you don't know the shortcut, you could sort of type out what you're looking for, and then we'll find that shortcut for you. So for example, if I'm looking at Apple and I want to know the market cap, but I don't know the shortcut, I could just type in market cap and we'll find that shortcut for you. And we'll go in here and then we'll graph market cap for you. If I wanted to look at Facebook PE, I could just type in PE. We'll find that shortcut for you, and then you could just select that shortcut. So these shortcuts are, the command bar is a quick way to get these shortcuts in here in case you don't want to browse or you forget where it is. So please make sure that you learn how this command bar works. It's a very, very powerful feature. The other thing that I want to mention about the command bar is a lot of our users, or it's very important for investors to think about ratios or relative returns. So in here, the way you do that is Apple : SPY. And so that would give me the relative series of Apple versus SPY, and I would select G in here. And now this is Apple versus SPY. And so if I wanted to do Tesla QQQ, I would select that in here. And that would give me Tesla QQQ, and I'm looking at the historical graph. And you could see here that it's Tesla versus QQQ, and then I could select different things here for relative performance or spread or whatever it is. You could use that in the GM function as well. So for example, if I have Tesla here, I could do Amazon XRT as another thing. So these relative performance functions use the colon, and you could use that in the command bar with the following kind of format. Okay, so that wraps up the command bar overview. The last thing I wanted to cover in the remaining time that I have is this function called MyDashboards. So MyDashboards, really, really powerful, very important. So please make sure that if you're using Koyfin, you're using MyDashboards. Let me just kind of scroll here and start with the main stuff here. I'm just going to start with my SaaS dashboard. I believe you all have, when you create a Koyfin account, you will all have a SaaS dashboard. The way that MyDashboards works is your dashboards are listed above here. So I have a bunch of dashboards because I've created a bunch. So I have SaaS, banks, semis. You could also see these dashboards in this little menu. So I have this little hamburger menu to the left of these. And then I have my dashboards laid out here as well. So these are all my dashboards. To the extent you ever want to delete a dashboard, that's in here as well. So for example, if I wanted to delete SaaS, I would then hover over this button here under remove. Let me kind of this copies of Howie's watch list. Let me actually delete that just to show you how it looks like. So let's say I don't want this. I would delete that. I would remove that, and that would get rid of that dashboard, okay? So this is your dashboard menu up here where the dashboards are listed. Once you have a dashboard created, there's really three components of a dashboard. Number one is this table. Number two is this chart. And the last thing is this dashboard news. So that's kind of the crux or the most important parts about a dashboard. And so let me just create a dashboard for you to show you what that's like. The way I would do that is click this new dashboard here, and then let's call it Webinar May, as we've done before. So I have my Webinar main here. I could add my tickers. So I could do Apple, and Tesla and Facebook and Amazon, and let me do GE because we're not all tech. And let me do ExxonMobil as well. You can see here I'm typing out all the tickers. To the extent you have a list of tickers in a CSV or you have it in an Excel sheet, you could just copy and paste the tickers into here. So you would just copy it from the Excel sheet, you would paste it into here, and then it would populate it. We do have a help article that details that. So if you go to our help articles, how to copy a ticker list, MyDashboards into a CSV, we actually show you how to do that, and that's a quick way to populate a dashboard if you have a CSV file and you don't want to type these out. So now that I have my tickers in here, one thing that you may want to do is you want to see how these tickers perform. So for example, I could go through this and control this chart. This chart by default will show the historical price, but you could load some other templates that you have. So you could look at normalized price, which will look at the total return of this. But you could also load up, remember that template we created called Webinar May? You could load up Webinar May, and that would, this is a little ugly and too big, that will load up that template that we had before. And notice Facebook, we had the annotations. Remember I told you annotations save, I wasn't lying, so there's that annotation. Notice how it's really busy here, and it's really busy because of all these labels. You could take off these labels by hitting this button, and all of a sudden, boom, you have a much cleaner chart to be able to kind of see what's going on. This chart has 5 different series. That's probably 3 or 4 too many. Usually 1 or 2 or 3 is kind of the best charts where you could synthesize the information, but you can do whatever you're comfortable with. But just remember, you could load up any chart you want in here. And then once you have this chart loaded, you can just go through the tickers and see the different ways that the chart looks for these different tickers. So make sure you understand how that works. So that's the graph. The next thing to mention is this table. This table is really important. Let me just maximize this table to kind of give you a sense of how big you can make it. So now it's a full screen. You notice here that I have some columns here. So I have my price, 1-day change, percent change, whatever it is. You can customize whatever columns you want to display here with something called views. And these are my views right here. So the view I have selected here is called Technicals 2. This is my views. I could select other views. So for example, I could look at Valuation 2. And in Valuation 2, I have these other kind of variables that I selected. We start you off with 3 different views, but you can create your own views. So for example, if I wanted to do a view called Webinar, that's what I'm going to call it, Webinar May. And then in here, I wanted to look at the security name. So I would select the name and it pops up here. I would look at the sector. I would look at the last price. I would look at the annualized total return over the past 10 years. I want to look at, let's say, percentage above 52-week low, percentage below 52-week high. I want to see where it is in the 52-week range. Let's say I want to find PE and I don't know where it is. I could search for it here, right? So I could type PE and it comes up here. I want to look at PE NTM. Let me delete that. And let's say I want to look at analyst estimates and I'm going to look at percentage above below price target. Okay. So you can, again, we have 350 indicators you can look at for stocks. You can create or select whatever indicators you want. You would put them into here. These are what my columns are going to be like. You could drag different columns around based on however you want to do it. You create this view called Webinar May, you hit save, and all of a sudden this view is a view that I have here for Webinar May. So to the extent that I have a different dashboard, and let's say I'm looking at my nat gas name, so these are some nat gas companies that I'm watching because nat gas has been rocking lately. I would select nat gas, and then I would select Webinar May, and it would look at this dashboard. It would look at these securities with these columns that I selected, right? Recognize these columns. So you can customize these columns and customize these views however you want. So very, very, very powerful feature. The last thing to mention on these dashboards is, to the extent that you create a dashboard and you want to share it with someone, we allow you to do that as well. So for example, if I have my Webinar May dashboard over here, and let me just minimize that so you can see it. And I have my Webinar May view, and I have my Webinar May template, graph template selected. What you can do is you could then share this dashboard. So what I would do is I would click share. I would turn sharing on. Once you turn sharing on, we give you a link for this dashboard. You would copy this link and you would send it to whoever you want. You would send it to your colleague. You would send it to your brother or sister. You could send it to whatever recipient you want. Once that recipient clicks on the link, they will then have a follow button here, and they'll be able to follow that dashboard. Once someone follows your dashboard, it'll show up here under follow dashboards. And so, for example, these are all the dashboards that I'm following that someone else shared with me. One of our investors, Howard Lindzen, has a dashboard called Howie's Watch List. So if I click on that, these are all the stocks that Howard Lindzen is watching, and I'm paying attention to that. I cannot modify this watch list, so I cannot delete securities. By the way, this is where you delete tickers. I cannot delete Tesla or Shopify or anything like that because this is Howard's dashboard, and I'm following it, and you can see it here. What I can do is I can take Howard's dashboard and I could copy it or duplicate it, and I would do that here, and I would call it copy of Howie's watch list. And now this dashboard is my dashboard. I'm not following that dashboard. It's my dashboard that I copied to my folder. And in here, I could do whatever I want. So if I wanted to get rid of Team, and I wanted to get rid of Bitcoin, and I wanted to get rid of Tesla, and I wanted to, let's say, add IBM, I could do that as well. So now that this is my dashboard, and I could do whatever I want with it in here, but I'm not following it anymore. So just remember and make sure you understand how this whole share and follow and duplicate workflow works, because it's really powerful when you have a dashboard and you can then share it with a bunch of users and then go through that. So I think that's it for everything I wanted to cover. Let's see if there are any questions. Okay, so and by the way, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A box and I'll try and get through it. So Jack, let early users stay on the free plan. Okay, we'll try our best. We'll always have we will always have a free plan. So to the extent that works for you, you can do that as well. Andrew asks, do you have a consensus forecast in the data for multiples, please, or is it all reported data? Thanks. Do you have a consensus forecast in the data for multiples, please? So, Andrew, I'm not sure I understand your question. Let me just answer it in a couple of different ways. So for Apple, when I go to estimates, based on the forecast here, so based on these numbers, we give you the PE. So this is the PE for Apple based on 2022 forecasts. We also have an NTM for next 12 months for PE. And the way that you would find that is you could type in PE, Apple PE. Notice we have NTM, which is next 12 months. LTM is last 12 months. This is reported. I like to look at the NTM. So this is always the forward-looking consensus for the next 12 months for Apple. So I hope that answers your question. David asks, is there a way to remove previous annotations from your graph? Absolutely. So if I go to my Facebook graph and I go to my webinar, Mary, and notice I have these annotations here. I don't like these. But one thing I could do is I could click on these annotations and then hit delete. So that's individually deleting them. There's also a delete all button here. So if I hit that, I'm going to delete all. And that's going to delete all my annotations. If I want to undo that, I could do that. But you have this delete all. You can delete in here. You could clone it. You could change the different colors. So make sure you know and understand that. Okay. Can you add your own data to a graph? Alvaro wants to know. You cannot add your own data to a graph right now, but that's something that we'll be working on in the future. Can you add holdings and purchase price to your dashboard? David Harold, thank you for that question. We are working on that right now. So in the next version of Koyfin due out in June, we will give you the ability to put in your own kind of purchase price and a lot of customized items for my dashboards. Right now, my dashboards is a little static. It's great, but it's static. But we're gonna really make these dashboards 10 times better in the next version due out in June. You'll be able to do customized notes. You'll be able to do customized columns. You'll be able to create multiple tables. You'll be able to arrange stuff. So we're really working very hard to create some awesome functionality for MyDashboards. Any future plans of adding crypto? Thank you, George. We have Bitcoin, which is, I believe, is crypto. We have that in our system right now. We don't really have any other crypto assets. Crypto is not our focus. There's a lot of good platforms out there that do crypto. We're not one of them, but in the future, when we have some more resources, we may add crypto. Could you please create a page listing all the sources of data? Thanks for your question, Igor. We give you the sources of data to the extent that we're allowed to name our source. We give you the sources of data in our data overview. So we do provide kind of some data guidelines in there. Anonymous wants to know, is there a way to show combined performance of a portfolio or a group of tickers? Great question, Anonymous. There's no way right now, but that's something that we're working on, and we hope to have out at some point this summer. Michael wants to know, can you search for stocks based on certain criteria? We don't have a screening function in terms of what you're asking for right now, and that's something that we will create. The best way to search for different criteria is kind of this workaround right now in market scatter. So if I look at S&P, let's say I want to look at market cap versus PE, and I select that. And so if you want to find all the stocks that are trading under 10 PE, you could then sort by PE here, and then you can sort of filter and see what's going on. I know that's not the best way to screen for things, but that's kind of what we have today. And a more advanced screening function is definitely something that we're working on. What is EBITDA and when can we use it? Tony, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. If you Google EBITDA, there's a bunch of great articles on what it is and how to use it, so please make sure you do that. Is there a plan to create backtesting functionality? Not in the near term, Igor, because we have a lot of kind of stuff to do, and that's just not on our roadmap in terms of what we're working on. So not in the near term. So if you're looking for backtesting, please find another source. Do you have industry averages when looking at a specific stock? Mike, that's a great question. We do not right now, but that's something that's going to be in our release in June, is we're going to have sector and market and 10-year averages for a lot of the things that we're looking at for fundamentals. So please stay tuned for that. Someone anonymous wants to know, for a college student, relative new security analysis, what's your advice on using Koyfin to get acclimated and best preparing for a finance job? My advice for you is to just start using it, to read our blog posts, to go on Twitter and follow some of the other people that are using Koyfin, and just start following stocks, open up a Robinhood account, start trading, start kind of having a thesis on things. It takes a long time to internalize all the information and everything that happens in investing in finance. And the best way to do that is to start doing it. And it definitely takes several months, several quarters, several years, but got to start today. And the best way is by doing it. Anonymous wants to know, what are the plans for options? Plan options. So Anonymous, you can listen to the recording that we'll send out for that information. Valerie wants to know, can I add my comments to tables? Valerie, that's going to be one of the custom fields that we're going to introduce in June for the upgrade of MyDashboards. So you'll be able to put in comments or custom fields or whatever it is. You can't do that now, but you will be able to in the next version, due out in June. Again, a question on pricing subscription plans. Please listen to the replay. Boo, if you missed it, we will send a recording. Barack wants to know if there's an API. We do not have an API because that's a restriction from many of our data providers. We're not a data provider. We're a analytics provider. So one of the reasons we have some of the data we have on our platform is because we can't then offer it to our users in an API form. Rodrigo wants to know, are we going to cover equities from other countries in the future? Rodrigo, we certainly will. In this June release that we have planned, we'll cover all international equities. So stay tuned for that. And as you guys may sense, we have this June release is going to be awesome, but we've been working on it for several months now. It's a little bit delayed, but we're close to getting it out, and it's going to be really, really awesome. Alvaro wants to know, do you support Firefox or Safari? We don't officially support them. From my understanding, Firefox and Safari work better than like Internet Explorer, but you will find some bugs, and we don't support it now. We may in the future when we have more resources. Plans to add commodities or futures? Michael wants to know, and we will add more futures and commodities. We're going to start with the indices, and then we'll add more commodities, but that's going to be part of the paid plan because that's some expensive version. Okay, and then one final question on paid versions. How much? Again, listen to the recording of the webinar. I covered that in my intro remarks. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Again, stay safe. Hope you're navigating these markets. Please play around Koyfin. If you have any questions, shoot us an email, help@koyfin.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.